Darren, thank you so much for taking the time for joining us today. Great to be with you again, and I look forward to hearing your take on this whole crazy situation we're in.
Nigel, thanks for asking to have me on. It's a pleasure to be talking to you again and seeing you again, considering we can't actually visit each other at the minute.
Yeah, crazy lockdown scenario. So the purpose really is to, a lot of people have been saying, what can we do to, if we're trying to express our dissatisfaction with this lockdown scenario. This is unprecedented sort of social experiment that's being enforced on us all at the moment in response to the coronavirus and the whole saga. So people want to know how they can express that in action in some way, and I'm keen to hear some of your ideas about the people's public trust and maybe a legal way that we can take action. But before we get into that, maybe we should just try and paint a picture of this whole saga and what's happening behind the scenes, what's the justification for what's happening, and what are the facts of reality? Because there's quite a lot to unpack, isn't there? There's quite a lot of twisted issues.
There's a real cloud of confusion around this, and we've got both the issues around the coronavirus and then also the issues around the legalities and whatnot of the lockdown and the very real shock, systemic shock that people are in, and cultures and economies are in right now, responding to literally the strongest intervention of government in the sort of day-to-day interactions of human beings possibly ever in the history of ever. I mean, for the government to insert itself between lovers and between family members is unprecedented. To say, I mean, to me, it's one of the biggest maneuvers that's in this is like, wow, you are telling lovers to not see each other. That's a real test of people's loyalty.
Not be with your elderly parents as they're dying as well.
Exactly. And for them to be left vulnerable, it's just, there's loads in there psychologically that is being asked by authority here. There's a huge trust that is being asked of their judgment and the level of it to say that it's fine to have certain business meetings and to speak to the cashier at the checkout, but not to see your ailing mother or father or not to see your lover. It's like, who came up with these rules?
But I think where this is going, and obviously the next step is it's the mandatory vaccination, and it might not be mandatory to start with. It might be tied to certain benefits, as we know. But ultimately, the real line to cross, the line in the sand, is the state going to forcibly inject my body? Does the state own my body, or do I own my body? That's the line in the sand.
Well, we've got all the feminists to thank for already setting the precedent. My body, my choice. It's maybe the first thing I'll agree with feminists on. Woo!
The serious issue here is the state taking control. We're losing our freedom, and people are walking around in fear. In my local shops, people are wearing masks, and everyone's standing 2 meters away. And I'm thinking, what's going on here? This is like a scene out of 12 Monkeys or something. It's. I didn't think that. I mean, I've always known that the tyrannical state is coming, but nevertheless to see it, expose its teeth like this
so quickly,
it so quickly, just like that, is really quite alarming. And the implications for all our freedoms, I think, are really scary. But my one contention from all of the time I've spent looking at this, every aspect of it, is that it's all based on flawed assumptions. Basically, it doesn't stand. It's like a castle on shifting sands, and there are facts of reality to disprove the whole assumption. So what I see when I'm walking out there is that people are afraid. They are all already on the assumed premise that there's a scary virus out there that's going to harm me. They're standing on that premise. So that's a given. That's a slam dunk, because that is the central thing that needs to be questioned. Is there really any health issue going on that isn't just another normal year? So people are walking around in fear, and I think it's important to try to get really down at the fundamentals and try to address that assumption that everyone's already got on. The media story, we're already talking about quibbling over personal protection equipment and how it should be managed and when the vaccine's going to be ready. And the whole conversation is now downstream of this assumption, and yet that's the assumption we need to question back there.
Part of the problem we're dealing with at this particular moment is that for me, still far too many people that think this is a reasonable course of action to take and that have accepted the authority of the state's representatives, not realizing that the state's representatives are not necessarily the best experts in the field to be listening to, as evidenced by Sweden, who is doing perfectly fine without a lockdown, and their death rates are similar, you know.
We could go further with this, because the same people now, or the same entity now, the state is speaking allegedly out of concern for our health and saving lives, and yet that same entity has a track record of disregarding every aspect of human health. You know, electromagnetic dangers totally ignored, fluoridation in water totally ignored, amalgam fillings totally ignored, glyphosate in the environment totally ignored. You know, even dragged kicking and screaming to admit that smoking was harmful after decades. You know, so to be listening to an entity or the same mouthpiece, you know, tag teamed with Big Pharma, telling us that they're speaking for our health. They stand on a fully incorrect paradigm of health anyway. You know, the modern medical model, the treatment of symptoms with drugs, the
Yes.
non-recognition of the microbiome and its importance, not even focusing on strengthening the immune system. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, you could spend hours just talking about the incorrectness of
Yes.
the medical model that they're standing within when they declare, A, that there's a problem, and B, here's the solution, it's a vaccine.
Yeah.
I would hope that we could, by exposing some of the facts that really question this fundamental assumption, is there a scary virus out there? Is there a reason for me to stand 6 feet away from anyone, not go outside? Is there really a reason, in fact, for that to happen? Because if there is, let's hear it. Let's see that case be built. It would be me. I would submit that it would be impossible, because it's a charade. There's too many holes in the whole story. So how do you think we could use the legal frame? Or maybe you could tell us a little bit about people's trust, well, people's public trust, and we could get into how we could sort of use this to question the government and say, look, we can't gather, we can't go and protest. You know, what can we do to sort of say, hey, this isn't right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's like you say, there's a number of layers here. First of all, I would say for people to be aware, you know, the first thing is to be aware of the amount of freedom that we do still have in this country and to use it for certain. You know, that's one major aspect. There's many ways that to leave with reasonable excuse and to create legal obligations that allow you to move around and to have encounters with people that maintain fair distance and all the rest of it, you know. And so there's ways to flex with the freedoms that are there, as evidenced by the number of people that aren't observing the guidelines anyway. And for those people whose work, you know, their daily life has really continued as normal, they haven't had this interruption, which is the people who are working in key working services and stuff like that. And as you'll see in those workplaces, those people aren't obeying any of the sort of social distancing guidelines or anything like that, because for them life has gone on as normal in a very real way, apart from they can't go to the pub or the theatre or the gym or something like that. So for me, the problem we're dealing with at the minute is there are too many people that think it is a reasonable reaction, regardless of the data. They aren't yet in a position of mistrusting the data. It's too soon. It's like we need longer for people to see that there aren't bodies stacking up, or while these bodies are allegedly stacking up, all of a sudden nobody's died of pneumonia, cancer, or COPD in 3 months. You know, when we start to see that sort of figures, then maybe there will be more foundations to sway more of the public attitude towards it, because there's just too many people trusting the media and the authorities, and it's not realizing that there are some selective experts of limited talent that have enabled this situation to be in, because it's a very unhealthy way of being for us as creatures. You know, we're living in an AI decision. A computer said this was the way to not spread viruses, and the reason we all feel like we're living in a Sims game as we're standing outside, the shop in the rain, is because a computer said that was the best way to not spread a virus, and everyone's looking around like, oh yeah, you know, way over there or whatever. It's an insane situation, really, and it's a sign of us giving too much authority to AI, to people who are in a job rather than their actual skill or authority level. There's so many variables in here, and until people are able to get a sense of their own authority when considering the actions of these people, they're not really in a position to do much themselves. You have to have a sense of your own authority to be able to question these people. Say, look, mate, I know you've got the uniform and I know you're hired to do this job, but this doesn't seem very reasonable. Things like that. You do need to have something about yourself to be able to do those things. Because you and I have seen it too much that there's people who just can't do that. So what can we do? Well, I have seen videos of. So there's two elements here psychologically that I think affect this. One is all of us getting used to the systemic shock of being stuck at home without our usual distractions and indulgences. And some people, you've got abused people stuck home with their abusers. There's a whole tension thing of people getting used to that. But on the other side of the fence, you've got the public servants who have been given these vast new powers in just a couple of sentences that they have to interpret themselves. And you've got to think about the education level of these people, the awareness levels of them, the insight levels, the compassion levels, all this sort of stuff. And to look at their challenges in wielding the sort of duties that have been asked of them. And so everybody's kind of trying to find their way in this new framework of being. And so, there's going to be getting it wrong, as we've already seen. So I'm kind of compassionate to that, but still something does need to be done for the people to feel like they can assert their authority with people who are abusing it at the minute when they've been given so much. And they may be immature, unskillful, a bully, or making inappropriate decisions. And this is where the People's Public Trust comes in, really. So many years ago, 10 years, it's actually 10 years old. The People's Public Trust was founded in 2010, believe it or not. And that was when we were dealing with look at that, dealing with some legal challenges many, many years ago, which was basically founded on the question of, are public servants entrusted with having the well-being of the people as their priority? And how high a priority are they entrusted with having that well-being? Surely it's one of the highest priorities to have the well-being of the people as your priority. And I've never met a person who said no to that question. And that's the foundation of the People's Public Trust, which is when people are behaving in ways which are not in accordance with the well-being of the people, then there is potentially a breach of trust there. And there is a potential for action. And the way the People's Public Trust works is by using observers on the ground who can intervene or call out public servants who may be behaving in inappropriate ways, to let them know they're being observed, recorded, reported on. There may be recommendations made about them. They may be legislated against, for breach of trust or for other forms of misconduct in a public office or for breaking the implicit trust of the 7 principles in public life, or in the case of a police officer, for being in breach of their oath. These are very powerful foundations within these job roles that carry power and authority that are intended to temper them. And yet these people forget that they are to be contained by their oath and contained by these principles of accountability, honesty, integrity, all of these things, all which have within them the implicit idea that, hey, you're being paid out of taxpayers' money to have the well-being of the people as your priority. When you're not doing that, you're not doing your job, mate, and the trust is a vessel for people to be able to express that. And the great thing is it was designed at a time when it was never designed with the need to gather involved. So really people can study what's involved in being an observer online and get involved with being an observer in their local area if they want to help out, and to help support others who may be being challenged inappropriately by public servants who are just getting a bit mad with power. So that's on a grassroots level the way the People's Public Trust can help people in this current situation, just by helping bring a bit more humanity into the interactions and to remind public servants that they are expected to give a humane service and a decent and respectful service. And in fact, they are oathed to do so, and they indeed uttered that oath, and it's in the words of their oath. So there's a real foundation for taking this action, and it can be done in a really humane way, and it needs to be done in a humane way. It can't be done with seeking to pick a fight. The place to pick the fight is in the courtroom. The place to pick the fight is higher up the chain, and the People's Public Trust can also work there, where it can work as a vessel, a private vessel, to express the will of the people who feel that their trusts have been broken by these individuals. And when you've got the CPS who have a conflict of interest when taking public servants to court, or you've got the police who also, with their internal complaints, rarely seeming to satisfy the public need for justice in certain situations. This is where the People's Public Trust really comes in.
To sort of summarise, I suppose, there to help people understand who maybe haven't heard of the People's Public Trust before.
Yeah.
It's a kind of it's an organisation, or it's a trust that can work to ensure the official claims of the public contract, the alleged social contract. It's a means of holding to account those who would claim authority over us. So it's completely separate from challenging authority over us. It's not challenging authority. It's saying, okay, well, you who are in public service with this authority and making us do this, that, and the other, locking us down, making us be vaccinated, you are looking after us, right? It's a means of holding them to account. What would you say the educational hurdle is for people? I mean, I imagine to appreciate what the People's Public Trust is and what it can do requires a certain amount of education already.
I think anybody is able, even across the board. This is what's so beautiful about the Public Trust, is that it's language people already understand. As soon as you say People's Public Trust, there is a sense of what's involved there, And then when we look at it and we ask the questions, these very simple questions: are public servants entrusted with the well-being of the people? That's something you can ask anybody, free man or not, and you can ask it even of public servants themselves. And the 7 principles of public life are something which are on public record, they're on gov.uk. It's something that most public servants should be aware of, because they are principles and standards that they are expected to uphold at all times. The constable's oath is something easily said and forgotten, but comes with it massive gravity. There's huge gravity in that oath, which is to temper the power that they are given. And without this piece of the puzzle helping manage this time when they've been given unprecedented power, it will be very difficult to restrain public servants who seem to be acting with impunity and feeling the real swagger or power of being able to move freely at other times when other people can't even get out of their house, and when constables have the power to ask somebody where they're going or to tell them they can't sit on a park bench. This is huge power to give to people that haven't been psychologically tested as to whether they are fit and able to wield that kind of power over the conduct of others. It's a huge issue.
It's true to say that the vast majority of people out there are happy to swallow the mainstream story and are somewhat reluctant or not predisposed to question. They're reluctant to question. They're just not the kind of. They're happy to get their information about what's going on and what to do from the group around them. So they're not really intellectually independent enough, if you like, to really scratch beneath the surface. So I suppose we're already talking to people that are asking questions, and this kind of legal action is going to be aimed at those people that already done a fair bit of thinking.
You don't need everybody to take. I mean, look at that woman that took the government to court over Brexit. She had just had the money and took the case. It's a matter of money and a small crew running with it. In a very real way, the stuff that's steering this situation at the minute are small groups moving opportunistically to take power or opportunity. And in a way, this is how it's countered by us doing exactly the same, which is by mustering some resource and seeking to take some effective action. And really, the vessel of the trust, on the angle of trust, using rather than using the sort of philosophical reinterpretations of law that the free man movement stood on. Instead of doing that, we're using the actual existent language of public life. This isn't like a conspiracy vessel. It's a genuine democratic vessel to hold public servants to account.
Can you give us a brief outline, Darren, on that? You had a couple of possibilities. One, a bill of peace. Two, a breach of trust. Could you give us a brief synopsis of both of those two processes or vehicles to present a case and how they might be used?
Yes. Okay, so I mean, so there's a number of ways trust action. So we spoke about how trust action could already be on the level of an individual who you're then taking into account over an individual oath or particular principles. But when you're dealing with institutions where there's multiple decision makers who need to be held to account, which is what we're dealing with in this sort of situation, it needs to be notched up a different level, really. And this is where the breach of trust comes in, because so at the minute, one of the biggest things that allows people of authority to behave with seeming impunity is limited liability. Which is, of course, what all incorporated bodies enjoy, which is to protect the private assets of the people. Which is the positive side of it. The negative side of it is that limited liability is diminished responsibility. And this is what has allowed fools, buffoons, unskilled people who are making decisions with vast amounts of public money and vast national influence, to repeatedly make mistakes without anything coming back at them.
Either that or not have the intellectual nous to question what they're being asked to do.
Public service has always been known for scraping the barrel, really, because it never paid as well as the private sector. And it's at times like this that we really all pay the price for that sort of decision. The breach of trust, first of all, is a thing that can be used against the institutions as well. For not upholding the principles of public life, for not having the well-being of the people, for not looking at all the data, for not being transparent enough, all these things. So these are angles, but they're really perhaps not powerful enough at this particular instance, And the Bill of Peace is something that is actually, it's like, I'll be honest with you, it's my giant secret weapon that was always held in reserve as being the ultimate tool of the people. And considering half the world are living under the conditions that we are all living under right now. I mean, it's an astonishing state of affairs, regardless of whether somebody's machinated it or not. It's an astonishing state of affairs. And the Bill of Peace is the original class action. It's the thing that preceded all class actions. And it is originated in this country, the home of some of the finest laws. And the Bill of Peace is about when a group is being oppressed or restricted or kind of adversely inhibited from getting about their daily lives freely, as their human right is to do so, then the Bill of Peace is exactly what it says. It's a bill that says peace on it, which is to stop the action of the oppressors. And this is hundreds of years old. I think it may have originally been used for perhaps racial groups like gypsies or Jews or something like that. I'm not sure. I'm not certain about where it has been applied, but it certainly hasn't been used in hundreds of years. But it is still a valid legal instrument in this country.
Would that kind of tool or vehicle lend itself well to systematic, rational exposure of the facts that undermine the case for lockdown, consequential economic collapse, blah blah blah?
Yes.
Would it be the kind of thing where you could, or would that be better done in a breach of trust?
No, I think it's more likely under the Bill of Peace you'd more likely get to expose that sort of stuff. Under breach of trust, what you're more looking to do is to drag them out of limited liability and diminished responsibility and hold them accountable. Because once you're in trust legislation, limited liability no longer applies.
I would have thought it's better to, or I see more benefit if we just zoom out for a moment.
Yeah.
Bigger picture. The goal that I have in mind is to expose the truth, is to have a platform for rational discussion, to somehow pitch the reasons that this is very dodgy and dubious. Then we need to understand exactly why we're acting as we are, and what's a threat and what isn't, and how the immune system works and what viruses are, and all of these things need to be taken into context. The facts versus this sort of lockdown, increase of power grab by the state, incursion of our freedom. This is a massive blow to freedom. I see it as a really significant time, which must be challenged, and there are facts of reality so how can we?
I don't think we can get to that stage, to be honest, because there is just too much misinformation and contra information out there. Everybody's got a keyboard. You've got doctors from every country now tweeting and posting and all the rest of it. There's just such a saturation. There's such a cloud of confusion out there. I think to assemble the facts and to invite them to all be appraised at this stage is a mammoth call, because who gets to choose the experts?
Let's look at it differently. Rather than assembling all of the facts, which of course sounds like and is an enormous challenge, showing what we don't know, illustrating, for example, the facts that are the limitations of a PCR test, etc., etc. That there are facts of what we know and what we don't, that can easily just pull the rug out from underneath justification for this kind of social experiment, this kind of economic devastation, this kind of power grab. It's got to be based on some facts. Why, if it was a scary disease and there were like, 1 billion people were dead already, shit, I'd be sitting up and paying notice as well. And we would all, it would be a different scenario, but we're not with the numbers that we're. So I suppose I come back to the point of the greater goal being to try to expose a counter narrative, to try and question those fundamentals, and using a legal vehicle, a legal tool to best try and do that.
If you reflect upon what you were just saying a moment ago about the fact that it's a power grab, what that means is that, as far as you are concerned, and I'm in agreement with you, this never has had anything to do with the coronavirus. It's simply been an opportunity. It's using what Event 201 cultivated to facilitate a power grab that's been planned for quite a while. So when we understand that, the sort of nitpicking over trying to call the facts out as being duff facts isn't going to gain ground, because they are duff facts, and the sort of it's been known about. And I think that's why there's such a cloud of contrafacts and saturated facts being chucked out there by the mountain, just to throw dust on the trail.
That's standard practice in a world of propaganda. There are 100 counter arguments for any good reasoned argument out there. Yeah.
But when we understand that, if we are, it's about agreeing what you think the narrative is here. What is the actual story here? If the story was the coronavirus and the lockdown, then I would agree with you that we should be calling out the facts on these things. But because I don't think that's what it is,
But here's the point, though, Darren. It exposes the real agenda by getting them to justify and questioning the official narrative.
But if you'll see, that data's out there and none of the media are picking it up. The data's out there and the mainstream media are choosing not to run with the facts from these virologists, from these epidemiologists, from these various qualified professionals all over the world that are saying exactly what you're saying and calling it out for what it is. Why are all of the mainstream channels and all of the papers not running with it? Because they are the ones who are almost like breaching the journalistic kind of...
The justification for economic lockdown to stop businesses from transacting, to stop people from trading, that is such a big deal, because we know from our contextual knowledge that the global economy is very frail and could fall. It's mathematically destined to not go on for much longer. And this looks very much like a controlled demolition, doesn't it, Darren? So we have to focus that in. This convenient lockdown, this knee-jerk overreaction lockdown policy is very conveniently masking, or indeed pushing over, the wobbly tower. The tower was wobbling and they've just pushed it over. Oh, look, coronavirus has done it. And what annoys me is the idea that people might join the dots there and think coronavirus toppled the economy, when it wasn't coronavirus. It was a bunch of incorrect assumptions that have caused a false policy to be sort of...
No, they weren't incorrect. They were seeded. It was intentionally. Those were intentionally highlighted as being the points of attention to focus on. Because let's remember, the power grab was and is to crash the economy. That's exactly. It is to eradicate middle class wealth. This is the biggest attack on the middle class ever. The guy called Ian Crane, he's in hospital right now. He gave a talk a number of years ago, and he was talking about revolutionary action. And he was basically saying that in the past, when the powers that were incumbent were either losing their grip or going in a bit of a diabolical direction, the working classes would usually feel it first, and they would seek to gather and seek to uprise, but struggle usually because they lacked wit and resource to organise on a large scale. And they would need to win over some of the middle classes who would usually be buffered from what the working class were experiencing because of their wealth and resource. And eventually the working class would engage some of the middle class, and the combination of the wit and the resource of the middle class with the grassroots ground power of the working class would create revolutionary action. And he was saying that if you wanted a global, kind of like a totalitarian state or a globalist state, what you would have to do is you would have to do something that would eradicate the wealth of the middle classes so that they could do nothing about it. And if you did that, then you would have a level playing field of a populace that could be governed because none of them had the resource to be able to tackle those that were in power. Like we were talking just now about taking the government to court. That is going to require money. It's going to require donations. You can't do it on nothing. It takes money. And so this to me is the first turn of a thumbscrew action. So everybody's like, oh, yeah, it's all right. We can write out, oh, yeah, coronavirus, blah, 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 blah. Total smokescreen. The real attack is on their bank balance, their investments, their rents. That's what the attack is on.
So we're in a time where people are going to have less and less free resources.
Well, yeah, exactly. Now is the time to do it. That's why I'm bringing the public trust out now, because it's like now is the time to do it, or the time to raise the funds, because in 6 months' time, how many of those resourced people with the wit to see that they are being milked dry here and don't know how to do something about it? I'm saying this is something you can do about it. But we have the means, but we have the sort of the tool, but not the fuel, which is the funding required. And basically, in 6 months' time, half the people that could help now will be out of the game. In 12 months' time, 75% of the people that could help now will be out of the game, out of their homes, possibly bankrupt, possibly business having to be sold and bought up by one of these big, globalists. And
who gets to own the house as soon as you can't pay that mortgage? And there's going to be a lot of people approaching that. It's going to go to the banks, as David Icke points out, and to the shareholders and
and they end up owning the businesses. They snap the businesses up for a song. They snap their properties up for a song. And again, the super wealthy get wealthy regardless of what's happening in the rest of the game, really.
By way of a sort of overview to tie up, I mean, I when we bear in mind everything that we've talked about, and we look at the sort of the track record of government's truth to us, it's rather laughable, isn't it, that we're supposed to take almost on trust from an entity that's repeatedly lied to us. People may have forgotten weapons of mass destruction and all the other many times that we've been provably lied to, and the fact that there's an agenda behind there's a globalist agenda that's not even a secret. Henry Kissinger and Gordon Brown coming out talking about the New World Order and all this.
Tony Blair talking about it as well.
It's not a secret that there's a globalist agenda, and my goodness, doesn't this play well into that agenda?
Well, there was Tony Blair talking about the other day, talking about how he happened to already have his team of 250 people in 25 teams that were ready to help governments reform and reorganize to handle this crisis. All of a sudden, these governments would be reforming all in the same way that would obviously allow that chain to just flow beautifully up the ladder. And it was like he was already ready to move. Bill Gates as well, saying his people are talking to the US government as to what coming out of lockdown was going to look like. Well, Bill, what's your people got to do about it? Same with you, Tony. Who gives a monkeys about your people? What do they know about it? And that was within just a few weeks of it happening. That's why I think that the red green suitcase maneuver, that was the go signal, I think, because the very next day, Italy went into lockdown and Bill Gates phoned the WHO and a pandemic was declared. That was the day after the go signal.
Chancellor, will the budget still be going ahead?
It's a critical year for tackling climate change, and the government is committed to reaching net zero by 2050. But how much will coronavirus impact what many believed would be a green budget?
And the 9th was the day that the Treasury of this country decided to say that it had a blank cheque for anything that was to come. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's so many factors that illustrate that there's a plan being acted in accordance
Yes.
with that.
Yes.
This is to me what we need to really hold it consciously in our minds and part of our context when we look around and say, gosh, everyone's scared of a virus, everyone's fearful of this this enemy rather that you can't see, the invisible enemy, the
Oh
scary
yes, the
virus.
invisible enemy.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
this is the fundamental lie that we got to really tackle, and it's so difficult, Darren, because the people I see when I go out there shopping, and I was out earlier on, as I said, people really look like they've bought into it. I mean, obviously
Yeah, they have.
there's a
Hook,
certain
line, and
amount of playing
sinker,
along, but in that you can't encroach on others. That would be, infringing upon their right if they want to stay 2 meters away from me. But yeah, it just seems incredible. And all of the friends and family that I speak to, the people that I would consider a little bit plugged into the matrix, perhaps, they're all fully sold on the fact that, or the presumption, I should say, the assumed premise that there is a health threat out there that's going to get them, that's going to invade their body and do them harm. They've taken on board this premise with every, and it's interesting to see that with every washing of hands, it's interesting that they appeal for the ritualistic measures. You wash your hands, you do this, you stay 2 meters, all of this social distancing. It's a ritual to rehearse and nail in that fundamental premise that you have to stand on when you do those rituals. And the premise is there's something scary out there, and this is protecting me from it.
real deal propaganda. Absolutely.
And when you've assembled a view that convinces you that we're being lied to, when I don't know about you, but when I see all the headlines in the news about vaccine ready by September and all of this sort of stuff, and
I don't think it's going to be. I don't think it's going to be mandatory at the end of it. I think it's going, but you will be socially excluded. Social inclusion will probably come at the cost of it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the mandatory vaccine is the end of the slippery slope. That's where the funnel comes to the bottom, and you go through into the mincing machine. That's the line upon. As soon as the state's invaded your body and injected your person, you've lost. You've lost. The state has assumed control of you. That is the in the Matrix moment. You've totally lost, and and I would resist that to the bitter end, to have my body invaded.
Well, that's why I don't think it's going to get to that. I think that is coming. That's being said now, so that then, when this sort of optional social inclusion middle ground is suggested, people will find it much more palatable. Because I think mandatory vaccine would cause rioting on the streets by some. I really do think it would. There's so many people so against it for all the right reasons. Because you're right, it's such an infringement on, my body, my choice sort of thing.
So do you see them cutting to things like you can travel, you can fly abroad for your holiday, but only if you have this health card or the National Service Health app that's tracked you, and provided you opt in to this, then you get the green light to travel. I mean, we're seeing it in China already, aren't we? I mean, it's a nightmare to imagine living under that. But do you see the sort of restrictions? You can join the gym provided you have your jab or you have your otherwise certificate of health.
Exactly how I see it. That's what I see as being their plan. Whether they get it or not is another question.
It's just the timing, really, isn't it? I think these things are inevitably down the pipe, because it's like the slide from democracy into socialism into communism. It's an inevitable process. It can't be reversed. It doesn't just swing back up the hill again. It just doesn't work like that. And when you give away freedoms like we are in the very act of washing your hands, thinking there's a scary virus out there, I believe is to have fallen into the trap. But to the extent that we're giving away our freedoms, we're committed to falling down that we're committed to the ultimate. Yep, the state owns me. I'm the state chattel.
I think that one is going to be further down the line. Like, we've got a year to 18 months about that. And I think at the minute, the opportunity now is for us to muster resource. Even so, I mean, this maneuver of saying not more than two to gather is to stop a proper action to being taken against the government over this. And if we look at who are the faces that we are seeing during this, handling this biggest crisis the country's ever seen, they're nobodies. They're nobodies. Nobody knows who these people are. They've come out of nowhere. Matt Hancock, who is Matt Hancock? Fucking nobody, you know? Dominic Raab, who's Dominic? Nobody. Where's Boris Johnson? Where are any of the powerful political figures in this country? They've disappeared. Utterly, everybody has disappeared, and we've got nobodies that are allegedly steering the helm in a staggering way. And at the minute, the ones who I think are moving opportunistically here in their move for power think that by not allowing people to gather in more than one, that they have got all opposition kind of trust in a sack, not realize and thinking that people can only petition, not realizing that the trust is a step beyond petition. It's a thing that uses the same power of gathering names and gathering the resource of the people, but uses it in a way that acts in the corporate arena, using private power to drag people, individuals, out of limited liability so they're accountable, or to hold large institutions to account for, national disasters.
I'm not convinced that there'll ever be much success in dragging individuals out of the hiding behind their limited liability.
Yes.
I'm not sure I'd focus on that, but
Yeah.
the breach of trust thing, if it can be shown that they're simply not doing their job correctly in accordance
Yes.
with their own standards, then
Yes.
that's going to have some mileage on it.
That's the mechanism. That's the mechanism, really, is to do exactly that. Is to go and use in that way. And start, depending on the individual situation, you're looking at anything from recommendations that might be like retraining or awareness building, which is a fair enough bit of feedback for somebody who's just trying to deal with power in a difficult role at a difficult time, to be understanding of the situation. But then obviously there's situations where the incompetence or the mistake or the consequence is so great that such mild reprimand is no longer an acceptable kind of recompense to the people for the damage that's been inflicted. It's like, I don't know if you've seen the rules that are circulating on Facebook. So the rules are basically, it's a list of the rules around the lockdown, and it's things like you absolutely must not leave the house unless you need to, and then you can. You cannot go to any shops except the ones which are open. That's okay. Masks are no good, but then they might be, and then they might also be mandatory. But they won't help you. They won't stop you from catching the virus. But then they might also be mandatory too. You can't. You must work from home unless you can't, and then it's okay to go out. The kind of the amount of grey that is around these rules is absolutely, it's almost laughable. And when you see the mix of like standing in the supermarket and watching the staff all mingling close to each other while enforcing the distance between the shoppers while they're in the queue, and yet the shoppers will be just a few feet apart while they're browsing the aisles, the sort of the madness of the kind of pantomiming around all this, I think any reasonable human would think that when you weigh all this up, surely there's an argument for, on the front foot, for getting some of this stuff lifted or lightened up, just through the sheer impracticalness of it.
Well, to me, it doesn't hold water on any level, because if we're even remotely thinking in fundamentals, if we're even remotely able to determine cause and effect and what's downstream of what, we don't need to be an economist to know that a functioning economy is more important than not overloading a health service, which is paid for by a functioning economy.
Exactly.
So the idea of rescuing this frail little and say, oh, never mind, oh dear, the economy's fallen over, but we've still got the NHS, it's just madness. And that reasoning alone, if nothing else, should, I think, get people out on the streets to say, you mad bunch of idiots.
Do you know what, though? This shows, though, this is a very clever move, you see, because if you look at the spelling, you look at the words that's been used here: stay at home, protect the NHS, save lives. That's the programme that's been issued. That's the programme, and the programme is calling upon the number one thing that people reacted to in the last election, which was the question of the NHS. And it has touched the nerve of the traditional political left, who tend to always want more government and always be more willing to do what they're told. So in a way, this move has been sought to invoke the social, what's the word for it? The social sort of obedience of the left in a way, to make them be the custodians of the state will. So the same people that get stirred by protect the NHS, I'm going to stay at home and my kids will not play with other children and I won't go and see my mum because I'm protecting the NHS. Yes. I mean, that's really that's invoking party loyalty, isn't it? You know, that's proper Big Brother. But the point is, those very same people, when they hear the word economy, they think rich people. And they don't care. They switch off then. They're like, yeah, screw the economy. I'm not, screw the rich people. Don't care about them. And they don't realize that the economy is actually livelihoods. It's producing vulnerability. It is people's security. It is how they feed their kids. And the point is that they're fooled by the word, and that's why these people are like, yeah, screw the economy. Economy, rich people, yeah, they can screw their money. And it's like, no, you don't realize what will happen here. Yes, my business isn't going to collapse out of it, but I will be affected by all the people whose businesses will collapse out of this, and their investments will fail, and their houses will go. This is going to be catastrophic. This is not the economy. This is creating vulnerability. This is taking healthy cells and asking them to behave like sick cells. It is taking a majority healthy population and asking it to behave like a majority sick population. It is utter insanity.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm really chuffed or enheartened, rather, I should say, by the idea that there may be something practical that we could do with our combined learned skills.
I must admit that when I heard about this situation and I thought about how people could be empowered using the trust like they did in the days gone by, I really realised that wow, it was really made for this. It's perfect for this. It's ideal. It doesn't matter. We don't need to gather. We don't need any of this. It's already all there. The tools are there. The laws are there. All the methodology is there. It's just about enabling the people who want to be enabled.
Well, look, Darren, thank you so much for sharing, all these ideas, and I'll put a link to the People's Public Trust page. Is there anything else you wanted to say in closing?
No, that's all. Just thanks very much for having me. We went on a bit of a meander there, I think, at times, but I hope people got some of the spirit behind of realizing that this is a real. And the other thing is, this is not new. This is tried and tested. We've used this in courts. We've used it on the ground. And while it hasn't always gone our way in terms of getting our will met, what it has done is it has ensured a humanity of service and a much more reasonable interaction with the public service, which I think is a worthy achievement in itself at these times when there's a real imbalance in the power.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for that. And thanks for listening. Do visit the website lawfulrebel.com and join us again on Lawful Rebel TV.
Be the change you want to see.